Camões called him the Lusitanian Aquiles. Before he was a verse, he was a man. His name was Duarte Pacheco Pereira. He grew up in a city turned towards the Atlantic, where the shipyard was a school, and the tide dictated the rhythm of men's lives. He lived among charts and currents, among measured stars and sails torn by the wind. He made science his helm. He made courage his course, a captain who thought like a cosmographer. He measured the night, listened to the moon, turned tides into strategy, and maps into safe passages. He left behind a book, the Esmeralda de Situ Orbis, that teaches how to read the ocean. Routes traced, latitudes measured, tides observed, all part of the grammar of the sea written beneath the stars. He was celebrated and then forgotten, like so many of his time, but what he did is not lost. It remains in the routes, the charts, in the way we look at the horizon. This documentary does not seek only deeds. It seeks character, rigor, restrained audacity, the silence of one who fulfills his duty and pays the price. We will follow the man behind the myth, the navigator who united arms and knowledge, who wished to understand before he conquered. Memory may falter, but the sea does not, carrying in its depths the truths of time. He was born in Lisbon around 1460, according to most chroniclers, a city of salt in its streets and the constant murmur of shipyards. He grew up among craftsmen of the sea and men of the court. He saw maps taking shape line by line. He heard pilots debating winds and currents, as if learning a new language. Still young, he entered the service of the king. As squire to King John II, he trained both in the discipline of the palace and in the precision of the nautical workshop. His hand on the compass, his eye on the stars. He studied what a captain needed to know: arithmetic, cartography, practical astronomy, astrolabe, quadrant, cross staff. More than mere instruments, they were methods. At sea, a mistake could cost a life. And then came the first voyages along the coast of Africa. From heat to calms to sudden downpours, the hull groaned beneath the strain. The sail sang with the wind. Every route was a lesson. Every sunset, another problem to solve. In the year 1488, weakened by fever, hunger, and exhaustion, his body collapsed. On the island of Principe, Bartolomeo Diaz found him, a castaway of the very ocean he had sought to measure, returning from the rounding of the Cape of Good Hope. He came back to himself, he returned to the deck, and he kept a promise: knowledge first and courage after. He left that place another man, more attentive to the tides, faithful to his measurements, capable of commanding and of listening. The forge was complete. Before the sails there was a line, and a single line could change the world. In Tordesillas on June 7, 1494, diplomats and cosmographers sat over maps. In the air, the echo of Inter Cetera and the papal bulls. On the table, the dispute of the Atlantic, what was already known and what no one had yet seen. The line was drawn 370 leagues west of Cape Verde. Ink on parchment, but in practice a meridian almost impossible to measure. Longitude was an enigma, and every league an uncertainty of the sea. Here Duarte appears as the king's man, a technical voice in a time when maps were guarded as secrets of state. The House of India kept the royal standard chart like a treasure chest. Routes were traced, coasts were sketched, and no one revealed more than was strictly necessary. Tordesillas was no mere act of politics. It was calculation and it was vision. An invisible boundary divided spheres of influence and opened, without them knowing, the path to new lands. In the shadow of the pen, he learned that the world could also be conquered with measurements, and that a captain served the crown as much on the map as on the sea. But before sailing eastward, the kingdom still had questions for the West. After the line came the unknown. The king wanted to know what lay to the west. In 1498, Duarte set out in secrecy. No proclamations, no chronicles of the court. Only the sea, only islands, and a vast land inhabited with wide rivers and a broken coast. The readings of the Esmeralda suggest they were ordered to discover the western part, and that this voyage may have touched the northern coast of what we now call Brazil. Some scholars, however, argue through the descriptions, estuaries, mangroves, relentless tides, all pointing to that very coast. Others are cautious. They see in the text an echo of several explorations, not a closed account. It is said there was a private report to the king, a letter or memorandum sent to King Manuel. If it existed, it has not reached us. What remains is the veiled tone of the Esmeralda and the debate. It is a hypothesis, much debated, serious enough to be considered here, told as it must be, with rigor and with caution. In 1503, they departed from Lisbon while the air still smelled of pitch. The Fifth Armada, led by Afonso de Albuquerque, set its course with a clear design: to secure the Indian Ocean for the crown, to raise a fortress in Cochin, and to punish the Samorin of Calicut. Sailed under hard captains, with faith in their instruments and in their men. Among them was Duarte, the man tradition places at the helm of the ship Espirito Santo. Long days at sea, the trade winds filling the sails, the deck ruled by discipline, shifts carefully marked, water rationed, salt on the skin, the astrolabe rose on his arm. The cross staff cut the horizon. In his notebook, living latitudes, numbers that meant lives. Each sunset a calculation, each clear night an opportunity. Once the Cape was rounded, India drew near, both promise and threat. In the Indian Ocean, the monsoon commanded, and those who ignored it soon learned the meaning of shipwreck. Duarte watched in silence, reading the ocean as he always had. He listened to the sea as one listens to an old ally. He sought water, wood, and repairs. He bargained in ports of call. He kept morale high, for no ship triumphs without its crew. At the prow, a name grew larger on the map: Cochin, where tides and empires would collide. There, the captain cosmographer would put to the test everything he had learned: that the tide has its hour, that the wind has its whims, and that order is the difference between disaster and victory. In 1504, the Malabar coast was in turmoil. The Zamorin gathered tens of thousands, determined to crush Cochin. The earth trembled with drums. The sea darkened with sails. Duarte had few men, but the tide was his ally. He measured the depths. He listened to the moon. He chose the hour. He raised defenses where river met sea. He turned the current into a wall and discipline into a cannon. When the assault came, the guns opened fire at the right moment. The enemy hulls struggled against the opposing tide, their momentum broken in the water. For months the struggle raged, wave after wave, battle after battle. 3 great assaults fell upon Cochin, and in all 3 Duarte prevailed. And yet Cochin endured, and there among sandbanks and murky waters was born the title the chroniclers gave him, Defender of Cochin, and the name that poetry would preserve forever, the Lusitanian Achilles. When Duarte returned to Portugal, he was welcomed as a hero. The defense of Cochin resounded across Europe. It reached the Pope in Rome and the kings of Christendom. For a time, his name was spoken among the greatest defenders of faith and crown. On his return, Duarte set himself to writing. He wished to fix in words what the sea had taught, before the noise of the deck could erase it. And so emerged the Esmeralda de Situ Orbis, his book of the sea. Routes traced with patience, latitudes recorded with rigor, tides explained by the moon, a manual of navigation for those who dared the unknown. He wrote in Portuguese, and not by accident, because knowledge too is preserved in language. It stands as one of the earliest modern scientific treatises in the vernacular. The manuscript remained in secrecy. It would only be printed in 1892. Among tables and observations, Duarte calculated the value of the degree of the meridian, with rare precision for his time, an error of about 4%. It was no accident. It was method, calculation, comparison, the mind of a man who crossed tides with numbers. Some have read in these pages traces of a western voyage in 1498, a glimpse of Brazil before Cabral. But what is certain is this: the book proves that science sailed with Portugal. The Atlantic, too, was a battlefield. Privateers prowled the routes to India. The king once more called upon Duarte. On paper, the mission was simple: pursue and destroy. But at sea, nothing was simple. Fog, currents, whispers of sails carried by the wind. On January 18, 1509, off Cape Finisterre, the encounter came. A French privateer, Pierre de Mondragon, sailed only for profit upon the waves, but Duarte carried the king's command. The battle opened with maneuver. The shot was no roar. It was calculation. When the smoke cleared, the threat was gone. Some say Mondragon was taken, others that he slipped away. Yet all agree the danger was ended. The empire's veins began to pulse again, and Duarte proved that the same method which defends ports also defends the open routes. In 1511, Duarte was called back into service. He commanded a fleet sent to relieve Tangier, then under siege by the King of Fez. The mission was a success. The city was saved, the threat broken. It was proof once again that where knowledge joined courage, victory could be forged. In 1519, he arrived at the fortress of St. George de Mina, appointed its captain and governor. Gold, fever, and the old tensions that never truly died. To represent the king, there was to walk on a knife's edge. And Duarte administered, he reinforced, he sought balance. But fate was already turning against him. But the wind shifted with the death of King Manuel. Accusations of corruption, even of smuggling, soon followed. In 1522, he was imprisoned in Lisbon. But the charges did not hold. He was absolved and justice cleared his name. Yet politics refused to restore his honor. Thus the hero of Cochin faded back into silence, his voice drowned by the tides of power. The glory sailed, and it sailed on other ships. It is presumed he died around 1533. No trumpet sounded. No cortege followed. Only his family remained, asking for what the kingdom had denied. What remained were the book, the letters, the lesson of the tides. What remained were safer routes, names engraved upon the world's shores. And what remained were verses. For sometimes it is poetry that rescues what politics erases. The great Pacheco, the Lusitanian Aquiles. Camões gave him voice once more, and that voice still reaches us. This is not only the portrait of a captain, it is the portrait of a method, of a country that learned to measure in order to go. He was Duarte Pacheco Pereira, who united arms with knowledge. He listened to the moon to understand the sea, and he showed that knowledge is too an act of courage. Even if history fails, the ocean never does. As long as there are tides and maps, the Lusitanian Achilles endures. Not only as a myth, but as a lesson. Kings will rise, and kings will fall. But a nation never forgets its heroes.